Can a moment of public humiliation destroy years of hard work and trust? What happens when the person you've shared your life with becomes your greatest enemy? I can still feel the spotlight's heat on my face, the expectant silence of the audience, and that sickening drop in my stomach when James stood up. The ballroom of the Westfield Hotel had been perfect just moments before. Elegant centerpieces adorning each table, my company's logo projected behind the stage, champagne flutes waiting to be raised in celebration. 4 years of marriage, 6 years of partnership, and 3 years of relentless work on TerraSync, my environmental monitoring system that would revolutionize how companies track their carbon footprint, had led to this moment. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I'd begun, my voice steady despite the butterflies. 3 years ago, I had a vision of making sustainability accessible and measurable for businesses of all sizes. That's when I noticed James's expression change. He'd been smiling proudly just seconds before, but now his face hardened as he stood up from our table at the front of the room. "This innovation isn't hers," he announced, his voice booming across the ballroom. "It was ideated by another." The room fell silent. 50 potential investors, tech journalists, and colleagues stared between us like spectators at a tennis match. My heart pounded so loudly, I was certain the microphone would pick it up. "Lydia," James continued, pulling documents from his jacket pocket, "has been taking credit for work that isn't hers." He waved the papers. "I have proof that the TerraSync algorithm was developed by David Brown at Horizon Tech." I gripped the podium, fingers turning white as memories flashed through my mind. Late nights coding in our apartment while James brought me coffee. The breakthrough moment when we'd finally gotten the sensor calibration right. The countless investor meetings where James had proudly introduced me as the brilliant mind behind TerraSync. And now this. "These documents," James continued, "show correspondence between Lydia and David Brown, along with original code timestamps that predate Lydia's invention by 6 months. The whispers started. Phones came out. I could see my career, my reputation, my future crumbling before my eyes. But something wasn't right. I'd never met anyone named David Brown. I'd never worked with Horizon Tech. The algorithm had been developed in our spare bedroom, line by painstaking line. And then I saw it. The slight curl at the corner of James's mouth. Not anger, not hurt, but satisfaction. 4 years of marriage, and I'd never seen that expression before. Or had I simply never noticed it? I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and allowed a small smile to cross my lips. "Thank you for your concern, James," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "I understand these are serious allegations, and I assure everyone here that all will be clarified very soon." I turned to the stunned audience. "I apologize, but I'll need to postpone tonight's presentation. Please enjoy the dinner and drinks. My team will be in touch with each of you personally within the next few days." As murmurs erupted throughout the room, I stepped down from the podium with as much dignity as I could muster. My marketing director, Sophia, rushed to my side. "What the hell just happened?" she whispered. "I don't know," I replied, watching James talk animatedly with a group of investors across the room. "But I'm going to find out." That night, our apartment felt like a battlefield. James didn't come home until after midnight. I'd spent hours going through our home office, searching for any clue about what had just happened. "Where did you get those documents?" I demanded when he walked in. James loosened his tie, looking irritatingly relaxed. "You should thank me for not doing this sooner, Em. Did you really think you could pull this off?" "Pull what off?" "James, I created TerraSync, you know that, you were there." He smiled that unfamiliar smile again. "I was there watching you steal somebody else's work. I've known for months." "That's impossible," I said, my voice cracking. "You're lying." "The investors certainly didn't think so," he replied. "I got 3 calls on my way home. They're pulling out." My legs nearly gave out. "Why? Why would you do this?" His face changed then, the mask slipping to reveal something cold underneath. "Because you were getting too successful, too independent. This was supposed to be our project, but somewhere along the way, it became all about you." The realization hit me like a physical blow. The man I'd married, the man I'd trusted with every aspect of my life and work, had deliberately sabotaged me out of jealousy. Get out, I whispered. This is my apartment too, Lydia. Get out. I grabbed my phone. Or I'm calling the police and telling them you've threatened me. He studied my face, perhaps weighing if I was serious. Finally, he collected his keys. You've got nothing without me, he said at the door. No product, no investors, no credibility. Tomorrow I'm calling a lawyer about TerraSync's intellectual property. Half of it is mine, after all. After he left, I sat on our living room floor and did something I hadn't allowed myself to do at the launch. I cried. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. Then, I made a cup of tea, opened my laptop, and began to work. James thought he'd destroyed me, but he'd forgotten something crucial. Before I was his wife, before I was even a tech entrepreneur, I'd been a cybersecurity specialist, and I kept backups of everything. I pulled up the original code repositories, the design documents, the research notes, all with clear timestamps and authentication trails. I found the emails from our first meeting with the prototype manufacturer in Taiwan. I recovered the voice memos I'd recorded while developing the algorithm. As the sun rose, I sent 2 emails. The first was to Rachel Wong, the fiercest tech lawyer in Silicon Valley. The second was to Sophia, telling her to reschedule the launch for next week. James had made a critical error. He hadn't realized that by publicly accusing me of theft, he'd made himself vulnerable to a defamation lawsuit. And he certainly didn't know that I'd installed security cameras in our home office 6 months ago after a break-in at a neighboring apartment. I wondered what the investors would think when they saw footage of him doctoring those documents at 2 a.m. last Tuesday. I finally fell into bed as dawn broke over San Francisco, exhausted but resolute. James had declared war, thinking I would surrender. He didn't know that the battle had only just begun. What he couldn't possibly imagine was that his public betrayal would ultimately be his downfall, and my unexpected salvation. The days following the launch disaster passed in a strange blur of clarity and determination. I moved through them with a kind of focused intensity I'd never experienced before, not even during the most critical development phases of TerraSync. We need to act fast, Rachel Wong said, pacing across her corner office overlooking the bay. Everything about her radiated efficiency, from her impeccable charcoal suit to her rapid-fire delivery. James has already filed paperwork claiming joint ownership of the intellectual property. He can't do that, I insisted. I developed the core algorithm before we were even married. Rachel stopped pacing and fixed me with a gaze that had made tech giants squirm in depositions. Did you have a prenup? My stomach sank. No. We were so in love, it seemed unnecessary. She nodded, unsurprised. And is his name on any of the company documents? As co-founder, advisor, anything? He's listed as a strategic advisor, I admitted. But he never worked on the actual technology. He handled investor relations while I built the product. Rachel made a note. That gives him a foothold, but not ownership. Now tell me about these security cameras you mentioned. I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder of video files. After a break-in nearby, I installed a small system. James knew about the living room and entry cameras, but not the one in the home office. Rachel watched silently as the footage played. James at our desk at 2:13 a.m. last Tuesday, scanning documents, using Photoshop, printing papers. The timestamp was clearly visible. This, Rachel said, tapping the screen, is extremely helpful, but also problematic if not handled correctly. She leaned back in her chair. Lydia, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest. I nodded. Is there any possibility, any at all, that some element of your work was derived from this David Brown person or Horizon Tech? Absolutely not, I said firmly. I've never even heard of them until James made his accusation. I'm starting to think they don't exist. Rachel typed something into her computer. After a moment, she turned the screen toward me. They exist. David Brown is the CTO at Horizon Technologies, a small environmental monitoring firm in Austin. They have a product similar to yours, but it uses different technology. I stared at the photo of a smiling Asian man in his 40s. I've never met him or communicated with him. Good, because I think I see what James is doing. Rachel minimized the browser and faced me directly. He's creating a narrative where you stole from a competitor. The documents are falsified. but the company and person are real enough to make the story plausible. I felt sick. Why would he do this? We built a life together. Rachel's expression softened slightly. I've seen this before. Partners who support their spouse's dreams until those dreams become too successful. Sometimes it's about control, sometimes it's ego. She paused. Has James been supportive of your career overall? The question made me pause. Images flashed through my mind. James suggesting I turn down a promotion at my cybersecurity job because the hours would be too much for our relationship. James convincing me to use my savings to fund our lifestyle while he networked for TerraSync. James insisting on joining investor meetings that I had arranged. He appeared supportive, I said slowly. But looking back, I think he liked the idea of my success as long as he could take credit for it. Rachel nodded as if this confirmed something. Here's what we're going to do. The next morning, I met with my core team at Sophia's apartment. The 5 of us crowded around her dining table, coffee cups and laptops creating an impromptu war room. The investors are spooked but not gone, Sophia reported. 3 have officially pulled out, but the others are taking a wait-and-see approach. We need to respond publicly, said Marcus, our PR director. The story's already circulating in tech blogs. Not yet, I countered, thinking of Rachel's strategy. We counter once we have everything lined up. Right now, we document and gather evidence. Priya, our lead engineer, pushed her laptop towards me. I've compiled a complete development timeline with authenticated commits to our private repository. Every piece of code is stamped with your credentials. And I've gathered all the lab testing results, added Kai, our hardware specialist. Equipment calibrations, prototype iterations, everything with dates and your signature. I looked around at their determined faces, feeling a surge of gratitude. Thank you, all of you. You didn't have to stand by me. Are you kidding? Sophia said. We've watched you build this from scratch. James may have charmed the investors, but we know who did the real work. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from David Brown himself. Ms. Miller? This is David Brown from Horizon Technologies. I understand my name has been connected to some allegations against you. My heart raced. Mr. Brown, I can assure you I've never... Please, he interrupted gently. I know. That's why I'm calling. I received a strange email last week from someone claiming to represent you, asking about our atmospheric monitoring system. I thought nothing of it until I saw your company mentioned in connection with mine. That would have been James, I said, the pieces falling into place. My soon-to-be ex-husband. I suspected something wasn't right, David continued. Our technologies are conceptually similar, but fundamentally different in execution. There's no intellectual property conflict. I closed my eyes in relief. Would you be willing to make a statement to that effect? That's why I'm calling. I don't appreciate being dragged into someone else's dispute, especially when it involves false allegations. By the end of the week, Rachel had assembled a formidable response. Authenticated development records, witness statements from my team, David Brown's written testimony that our technologies were distinct, and the security footage of James falsifying documents. We're ready, Rachel said. Monday morning, we filed the defamation lawsuit and issue our press release. That evening, I sat alone in a hotel room. I'd moved out the day after the launch, looking at my wedding photo. James's face, once so beloved, now seemed like a mask hiding someone I'd never truly known. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You should drop this before things get worse. Some secrets need to stay buried. I forwarded it to Rachel, then blocked the number. James still thought he held all the cards. He had no idea that when Rachel's legal team had begun digging into his background, they'd found inconsistencies, significant ones. Lydia, Rachel had said cautiously that afternoon, are you aware that James was previously employed at Novartech under a different last name? Or that he was involved in a lawsuit with them 4 years ago, right before you met? I wasn't. Just as I wasn't aware of the restraining order filed against him by an ex-girlfriend in 2016, or the fact that his Stanford MBA appeared to be fabricated. The man I married, the man I'd trusted with my heart and my company, was largely a fiction. And as I stared at our wedding photo, I realized with startling clarity that the greatest innovation of my life wouldn't be TerraSync. It would be who I became after surviving James. I put down the photo and picked up my laptop. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, I had code to review and a company to save. The next time I stood on a stage to launch TerraSync, it would be on my terms. And no one would ever again mistake my work for someone else's. Little did I know that what I would discover the next morning would change everything. Not just for me and James, but for everyone who thought they knew him. I woke to pounding on my hotel room door. "Lydia! Open up! You need to see this now!" Sophia's voice held an urgency that jolted me fully awake. I checked the time, 6:17 a.m., and stumbled to the door. "What's happened?" I asked, letting her in. Sophia thrust her tablet into my hands. "It's everywhere. Every tech blog, business news site, even mainstream media is picking it up." I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the headline. Serial startup saboteur. The man who conned Silicon Valley. Below it was James's face. "I don't understand," I mumbled, scrolling through the article. "We weren't filing until Monday." "It wasn't us," Sophia said, perching on the edge of the bed. "Someone else came forward. Multiple someones, actually." As I read, the room seemed to tilt around me. James Miller, or James Whitfield, as he was apparently known before we met, had a history. The article detailed how he had inserted himself into at least 3 other startups over the past decade. Each time, the pattern was similar. He'd charm his way into a founder's life, personally or professionally, help build the company to a critical point, then sabotage it, usually while positioning himself to profit from its downfall. "There's more," Sophia said quietly, taking the tablet and opening another tab. This woman, Melanie Carter, she was the founder of BrightPath, that solar energy startup that collapsed in 2016. She was also his fiancée. The photo showed a striking woman with deep brown skin and penetrating eyes. Her statement was blunt. "After James destroyed my company and reputation, I disappeared from the tech world. When I saw history repeating with TerraSync, I couldn't stay silent again." "Rachel's been trying to reach you," Sophia continued. "Apparently her investigation triggered something. When she started making inquiries about James's past, people noticed. Someone connected the dots. My phone was flooded with missed calls and messages, from Rachel, from journalists, from former colleagues. Even my mother, who lived in rural Maine and barely used the internet, had texted, 'Is this your James on the news?' How many people did he hurt?" I whispered. "At least 4 companies that we know of," Sophia replied. "But you're the first one he married." I felt a strange, detached calm settle over me. "Call Rachel. Tell her I'll be at her office in an hour." After Sophia left, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process this revelation. I'd been prepared to fight James over my company, but this was beyond anything I'd imagined. The man I'd loved was a professional con artist. Our entire relationship had been a calculated move in his long game. The thought should have destroyed me. Instead, it crystallized something inside me, transforming hurt into hard-edged determination. I showered, dressed in my most professional outfit, and headed to Rachel's office. The city felt different somehow. Or perhaps I was the one who had changed. Rachel's office was crowded with her team and mine. The atmosphere was electric with a strange mixture of crisis and opportunity. "This changes our strategy," Rachel said after greeting me. "The defamation case is still solid, but now we're dealing with something much bigger. The FBI's white-collar crime division has reached out. They've apparently had their eye on James for a while." "What does this mean for TerraSync?" I asked. My company, my creation, still had to be my priority. "It helps you," Rachel replied confidently. "The narrative has completely shifted. You're no longer the alleged intellectual property thief. You're his latest victim. But we need to get ahead of this story." Marcus nodded in agreement. "I've already had calls from TechCrunch, Wired, and the Wall Street Journal. They all want your statement." "No statements yet," Rachel cautioned. "First, we meet with the other founders he targeted. Building a united front will strengthen everyone's position." By noon, it was arranged. A meeting with Melanie Carter and 2 other founders, Sanjay Patel of Viridian Systems and Lucas Kim of Farsight Analytics, at Rachel's office that evening. Sitting across from them was surreal. 4 strangers connected by the same man, the same betrayal. We were a diverse group in age, background, and industry, yet the hurt and determination in their eyes mirrored my own. He approached me at a tech conference, Sanjay explained, became my mentor, then my company's advisor. When we were about to close our Series A funding, he presented evidence that our core technology violated 3 patents. For me, it was a business partnership, Lucas added. He joined as COO, then started spreading rumors to our clients that our data analytics were flawed. Melanie stayed quiet until the end. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but weighted with emotion. James and I were engaged for 18 months. He systematically isolated me from my support network, undermined my confidence, and then destroyed my company from the inside. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. The parallels were chilling. In each case, James had gotten close, professionally and often personally, gained trust, learned the business from the inside, and then struck at the most vulnerable moment. Why? I asked, the question that had been haunting me. What does he gain? Money. Control, Melanie answered simply. And yes, money. In my case, he shorted our stock before creating the crisis, then bought the core technology at bankruptcy prices through a shell company. But how has he gotten away with this? Lucas asked in frustration. Rachel interjected, by being very careful, using different names, and choosing victims who would be too emotionally devastated to fight back effectively. She looked at each of us. That ends now. We spent hours crafting a strategy. Legal, media, and business. By the time we finished, it was past midnight, but I felt more centered than I had since the disastrous launch. As we prepared to leave, Melanie pulled me aside. This won't be easy, she said softly. James doesn't give up, and he fights dirty. When he realizes he's cornered, he'll come after you personally. I'm ready, I told her, with more confidence than I truly felt. She studied my face. Maybe you are. Just remember, this isn't just about saving your company anymore. It's about making sure he can't do this to anyone else. I returned to my hotel room exhausted but clear-headed. As I kicked off my shoes, my phone buzzed with a text from a different unknown number. I always liked you, Lydia. That's why I waited so long. Don't force my hand. I didn't need to ask who it was. Instead of fear, I felt a surge of anger. James still believed he held power over me. He didn't realize that by bringing Melanie, Sanjay, and Lucas into my life, he'd given me something invaluable, perspective and allies who truly understood what I was facing. I forwarded the text to Rachel with the message, document everything. Meeting tomorrow to discuss next steps. Then I did something that surprised even me. I called the hotel restaurant and ordered a celebratory glass of champagne. When it arrived, I stood by the window overlooking the city lights and raised my glass. To the end of James Miller, I whispered, and the beginning of the real Lydia Miller. Sleep came easily that night, but I woke at dawn with a startling realization. In all our planning, we'd focused on defense, protecting our reputations, securing our companies, building legal cases. What we hadn't discussed was going on the offensive. I grabbed my laptop and began to work, the pieces of a plan falling into place. James had nearly destroyed 4 companies by attacking from the inside. But what if those 4 companies came together? What if, instead of just surviving his sabotage, we created something stronger from the wreckage? By the time the sun fully rose, I had drafted a proposal that would change everything. I couldn't wait to share it with the others. What I didn't know then was that James was already making his next move, one that would force me to choose between saving my company and protecting someone I'd never expected to be drawn into this battle. The next week blurred into a whirlwind of activity. Each morning brought new revelations about James and his past schemes. The tech community, initially skeptical of my claims, now rallied behind me and the other founders he had targeted. 3 of our investors who had pulled out after the launch disaster called to reinstate their support. TerraSync was alive again. Your stock would be soaring if you were public, Rachel remarked during one of our daily strategy meetings. The publicity has turned you into a tech world hero. Let's not overstate things, I cautioned, uncomfortable with the attention. We still have a long way to go. Lydia, Sophia interjected, you need to embrace this. The woman who fought back narrative is powerful. We've had 17 interview requests just this morning. I understood their point. In a strange twist of fate, James's attack had given TerraSync more visibility than we could have achieved with a successful launch. But I remained uneasy about becoming the face of corporate victimhood. What matters is what we do next, I said, redirecting the conversation. Has everyone reviewed my proposal? The proposal I'd drafted that dawn after meeting the other founders had evolved into a comprehensive plan. A strategic alliance between our 4 companies, combining TerraSync's environmental monitoring technology with Melanie's solar energy solutions, Sanjay's green building materials, and Lucas's consumption analytics. Together, we could offer an integrated sustainability platform that none of us could create alone. It's ambitious, Priya commented. The technical integration alone would take months. But it's brilliant, Kai added. Instead of just surviving James's attacks, we'd be building something stronger because of them. I nodded. That's exactly the point. He tried to tear us down individually. We respond by building something together that's greater than the sum of its parts. By Thursday, all 3 other founders had tentatively agreed to explore the alliance. We scheduled a full day of meetings for Monday to begin the technical and business planning. For the first time since the launch disaster, I felt genuine excitement about the future. Then Friday morning arrived, and with it, James's counterattack. I was reviewing code with Priya when Sophia burst into the conference room we'd been using as temporary headquarters. Turn on the news, she said breathlessly. Right now. The local business channel was running a breaking story. James Miller had just held a press conference claiming he was the victim of a coordinated smear campaign by disgruntled former business associates. He appeared somber and composed, with a woman I didn't recognize standing supportively at his side. While I take full responsibility for my failures as a husband to Lydia, he was saying, his voice catching with apparent emotion, these allegations about my past are fabricated. I've never used another name, never intentionally harmed any company I've worked with. The camera cut to the woman beside him. I've known James for 15 years, she stated firmly. These accusations don't match the man I know. Who is she? I asked. Vanessa Miller, Sophia replied grimly. His sister. I stared at the screen. In 4 years of marriage, James had never mentioned having a sister. But James wasn't finished. What truly breaks my heart, he continued, is that Lydia's allegations have now threatened my family. My sister Vanessa's climate research nonprofit lost its main funding source this morning, a direct result of her association with me. My phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. Classic James. Using emotional manipulation. Don't fall for it. But as the press conference continued, I felt a creeping unease. What if this woman really was innocent? What if my fight with James was causing collateral damage? Rachel called immediately after the broadcast ended. Ignore this, she advised firmly. It's a textbook diversionary tactic. He's trying to shift from villain to victim. But what if his sister's organization really did lose funding? I asked. Then that's unfortunate, but not your responsibility, Rachel replied. Stay focused. I tried to follow her advice, but the doubt lingered. After years of living with James, I'd developed a finely tuned radar for his manipulations, but I'd also repeatedly failed to see through them. That evening, I received an email from Vanessa Miller. I don't know what's happened between you and my brother, but my organization helps Indigenous communities implement climate adaptation strategies. We just lost our primary grant. 20 people's jobs are at stake. Please call me. Against Rachel's explicit advice, I called the number. Thank you for getting back to me, Vanessa said, sounding genuinely relieved. I know this puts you in an awkward position. I didn't know James had a sister, I said cautiously. There was a pause. We've been estranged for many years. James only reached out recently when all this started happening. Something in her hesitation caught my attention. Ms. Miller, please call me Vanessa. Vanessa, I'm sorry about your organization's funding, but I need to be clear. I haven't made any false allegations about your brother. I understand that's what you believe, she said diplomatically. Look, I'm not asking you to drop anything. I just need help connecting with new potential funders. James suggested you might have contacts who could help. The request seemed reasonable, even compassionate. But the mention of James suggesting it triggered warning bells. I'd like to learn more about your organization, I said carefully. Perhaps we could meet for coffee tomorrow. After we ended the call, I immediately contacted a private investigator Rachel had recommended. I need everything you can find on Vanessa Miller and her climate nonprofit Priority Rush. The next morning, I met Vanessa at a busy cafe downtown. In person, I could see a faint family resemblance to James, something in the shape of her eyes and the way she gestured when speaking. She was articulate and passionate about her work, providing details about climate adaptation projects in several countries. We were just expanding our operations in Indonesia when the funding was pulled, she explained, showing me photos on her tablet. These communities are already experiencing sea level rise. Without intervention, they'll be climate refugees within a decade. Her knowledge and commitment seemed genuine. For 2 hours, we discussed her work, carefully avoiding the topic of James. I found myself wanting to help her, and wondering if I'd become too suspicious, seeing manipulation where there was only a family connection. As we parted, I promised to make some introductions to potential funders. She hugged me impulsively. Thank you, Lydia. Whatever's happened with James, I'm glad to know you. I returned to our temporary office conflicted. Had I just fallen for another manipulation? Or was I helping an innocent person caught in the crossfire? My answer came at 3 p.m. when the private investigator called. I stepped outside to take it. Ms. Miller, I have some interesting findings, he said without preamble. Vanessa Miller exists and does run a climate nonprofit called Coastal Resilience Initiative. It was founded 3 years ago and has done legitimate work. I felt a rush of relief, followed immediately by guilt for doubting her. However, he continued, there are some irregularities. The organization received a single large grant from the Whitaker Foundation 3 months ago, right around the time you and your husband began having problems, according to your timeline. What's the Whitaker Foundation? I asked. A small family foundation focused on environmental causes. Here's where it gets interesting. I can't conclusively prove it yet, but there appears to be a connection between the Whitaker Foundation and a shell company called Meridian Ventures. My stomach dropped. And Meridian Ventures? Is registered to an address previously associated with James Miller, under his former name, James Whitfield. I leaned against the wall, processing this. So you're saying... I'm saying it appears possible that your husband set up or controlled the foundation that became his sister's primary funder, specifically so it could be withdrawn at a strategic moment. The elaborate nature of the deception was stunning. But why? Why involve his estranged sister in all this? That I can't tell you, the investigator replied. But I'd recommend extreme caution in any dealings with her. I thanked him and ended the call, then stood outside for several minutes, trying to make sense of it all. Had Vanessa been manipulated by James too? Or was she a willing accomplice? Either way, the careful orchestration of this latest move revealed a level of calculation that chilled me. When I finally returned inside, I found Sophia waiting anxiously. There you are. Rachel's been trying to reach you. James filed for an emergency injunction this afternoon claiming you and the other founders are engaged in corporate espionage. There's a hearing Monday morning. I stared at her, connecting the dots. Monday, the same day we had scheduled our alliance planning meeting. James was trying to prevent us from joining forces. I took a deep breath and made a decision. Tell Rachel I'll call her in 5 minutes, and get Melanie, Sanjay, and Lucas on a video conference immediately. As I walked to the conference room, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Thank you for meeting today. I'm so grateful for your help during this difficult time. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked her number and steeled myself for what was coming next. What I couldn't know then was that James had one more devastating card to play, and it would force me to choose between saving my company and preserving what remained of my personal integrity. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters Monday morning. News of the emergency injunction had leaked, transforming our legal battle into the latest Silicon Valley spectacle. Cameras flashed as I climbed the steps flanked by Rachel and her associates. the other 3 founders walking beside me in a show of solidarity. "No comments until after the hearing," Rachel instructed as microphones were thrust toward us. Inside, the courtroom was already full. James sat at the plaintiff's table, looking impeccable in a charcoal suit, his attorney whispering in his ear. When our eyes met, he gave me a small smile. Not the triumphant smirk I expected, but something almost sad, as if to say, "This could have been avoided." I looked away first. The hearing proceeded with a clinical efficiency that felt surreal given the personal devastation behind it. James's attorney argued that our planned alliance constituted a conspiracy to defame him and misappropriate business methods he had developed. "Your Honor, Mr. Miller was instrumental in developing strategic approaches that these 4 individuals are now attempting to combine and claim as their own," the attorney asserted. "We have evidence of communication between these parties that constitutes corporate espionage," Rachel countered forcefully. "Your Honor, this injunction request is nothing but an attempt to prevent legitimate business collaboration between separate entities. Mr. Miller has no ownership stake in any of these companies, and no claim to their strategic plans." The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, seemed skeptical of both sides. "I'd like to see this evidence of corporate espionage," she directed James's attorney. With theatrical timing, the attorney produced a folder. Emails between Ms. Miller and the other defendants, discussing proprietary methodologies developed during her marriage to my client. I felt a chill. There had been emails, many of them, but we'd discussed our technologies, not James's supposed methodologies. The judge reviewed the documents, her expression revealing nothing. "I'll need to consider these materials before ruling. We'll reconvene at 2 o'clock. As we filed out, Melanie whispered, "What emails is he talking about?" "I don't know," I replied. "But we shouldn't discuss it here." In a small conference room Rachel had secured, we huddled around her laptop, reviewing copies of the submitted evidence. "These are altered," I said immediately, pointing at an email exchange between Sanjay and me. "This paragraph about implementing James' customer segmentation approach, I never wrote that." "Same here," Lucas confirmed, examining another document. "This makes it sound like we were stealing his ideas, but these aren't even my words." Rachel frowned. "He's doctored evidence before. We anticipated this, which is why we have the original emails preserved with full metadata. The question is, did he submit these falsified versions to the court? If he did, that's perjury," Melanie said. Rachel was already on the phone to her office. "Jennifer, I need the forensic tech here immediately with the email authentication tools. Yes, it's urgent." By 1:30, our tech expert had analyzed the submitted emails and confirmed our suspicions. They'd been altered, with entire paragraphs inserted that didn't exist in the originals. "This is actually good news," Rachel told us as we prepared to return to court. "Submitting falsified evidence will destroy his case and potentially result in sanctions." As we stood to leave, my phone vibrated with a message from a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I checked it. "Final chance, Lydia. Drop this now, or your parents receive documentation of your involvement in academic fraud at MIT. Your father's position at the university wouldn't survive the scandal." My blood ran cold. There had been no academic fraud, but my father, a tenured physics professor, had recently been appointed department chair after a contentious selection process. Even a fabricated scandal could damage his reputation irreparably. Rachel noticed my expression. "What is it?" I showed her the message. "Classic intimidation," she said, though her voice held new concern. "How would James even create believable evidence of academic fraud?" I remembered something then, a collaborative project during my graduate studies where I'd helped a classmate improve his algorithm. He'd credited me properly in the final paper, but initial drafts in my files showed significant contributions from me that appeared unattributed. Out of context, those documents could be manipulated to suggest impropriety, and James had access to all my old hard drives at our apartment. "He could make it look real enough to cause damage," I said quietly. Rachel studied me. "What do you want to do?" For a moment, I considered capitulating. My father's career versus a company that might not survive anyway. Was it worth the risk? Then I thought of Melanie, who had given up after James's attack and lived with the consequences for years. I thought of the young women entrepreneurs who would come after me, potential targets if James wasn't stopped now. "We proceed as planned," I said firmly, "but I need to call my parents." The brief conversation with my father was one of the hardest of my life. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, warning him about potential false allegations. "Emmy," he said, using my childhood nickname, "your mother and I have watched you fight battles since you were diagnosed with dyslexia in 3rd grade. You've never backed down from what's right, and you shouldn't start now." His unwavering support brought tears to my eyes, even as it reinforced my resolve. Back in the courtroom at 2 p.m., the atmosphere had shifted. The judge's expression was stern as she called the session to order. "Before I rule on the injunction, there's a more pressing matter to address," she began. "Ms. Wong has submitted evidence suggesting that the emails presented by the plaintiff have been altered. This is a serious allegation that, if true, constitutes perjury and fraud upon the court." James's attorney appeared genuinely shocked. "Your Honor, my client provided these documents to me as authentic. If there's any issue with their integrity, I was unaware." "I move that the injunction be denied immediately," Rachel stated, "and further, that sanctions be considered against Mr. Miller for submitting falsified evidence." The judge nodded. "The injunction is denied. As for sanctions, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential criminal charges. This court does not take kindly to being misled." James showed no visible reaction beyond a slight tightening of his jaw. As the judge continued outlining next steps, I realized that for the first time since our confrontation began, I was seeing the real James, not the charismatic businessman or the loving husband, but the calculating manipulator beneath. Outside the courthouse, Rachel held an impromptu press conference while James slipped away through a side exit. Our victory felt surreal, necessary but incomplete. That evening, the 4 of us, Melanie, Sanjay, Lucas, and I, gathered at my hotel suite. Despite the tense day, the mood was cautiously celebratory. "The alliance is officially greenlit," Sanjay said, raising a glass of champagne. "To Renaissance partners." The name we'd chosen for our collaboration felt appropriate, a rebirth from the ashes of what James had tried to destroy. "He's not finished," Melanie cautioned after the toast. "James doesn't surrender easily." "Let him come," Lucas replied with new confidence. "He can't fight all of us together." I wanted to share their optimism, but the text about my father lingered in my mind. What else might James do when truly cornered? After everyone left, I sat by the window watching the city lights, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 4 weeks ago, I'd been preparing to launch TerraSync with my loving husband by my side. Now, I was living in a hotel, heading a company in crisis, and part of an alliance born of collective trauma. My phone buzzed with a new message. Rachel, forwarding an email from James's attorney with a settlement offer. In exchange for us dropping all claims against him and signing NDAs, he would withdraw from any involvement with our companies and leave the area. "Not nearly good enough," Rachel had added. "We press forward." I agreed, but couldn't help wondering what it would mean to truly put this behind me. Even with the alliance moving forward, even with James potentially facing criminal charges, could I ever really feel whole again after such profound betrayal? Sleep eluded me that night. Around 3 a.m., I found myself reviewing old photos on my laptop, snapshots of happier times with James, searching for clues I might have missed. Had there been signs all along? Moments when the mask had slipped? In one photo from a vacation in Lake Tahoe, I noticed something I'd overlooked before. James was looking not at the camera but at me, and his expression held something I now recognized: calculation. Even in our happiest moments, he had been measuring, assessing, planning. The realization brought an unexpected sense of clarity. James had never loved me. Not really. I had been a means to an end. A promising startup founder he could manipulate and control. The betrayal at the launch hadn't been a sudden change. It had been the culmination of a plan years in the making. Strangely, this understanding didn't bring more pain, but rather a sense of freedom. If James had never truly loved me, then I hadn't lost a genuine relationship. I'd escaped a false one. As dawn broke over the city, I made a decision. We would continue pressing our case against James, but I would no longer allow him to occupy space in my heart or mind. My focus needed to be on building something new, not avenging something lost. I was drafting an email to share this perspective with the others when my hotel room phone rang. Unusual at 6 a.m., the front desk clerk sounded apologetic. "Ms. Miller, there's someone insisting on seeing you. She says it's urgent." A Ms. Vanessa Miller. My first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won out. "I'll come down." In the lobby, Vanessa paced nervously, looking disheveled and anxious. Very different from our coffee meeting. When she saw me, her expression turned pleading. "Lydia, I know you have every reason not to trust me, but you need to hear this. James is planning something desperate. He came to my apartment last night, talking about starting over, how nothing was lost yet. He had a laptop and external drives he said contained insurance against all of you." I studied her carefully. "Why are you telling me this? Last I checked, you were defending him publicly." Her composure cracked. "Because he threatened me too when I questioned him. The brother I knew growing up wouldn't do that." She handed me a folded paper. "This is the address where he's staying. I think you should tell your lawyer, or maybe the police." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Is your nonprofit real? The climate work?" She paused. "Yes, that part is real. Though I suspect the funding was James's manipulation all along." With that, she walked out. I stared at the address in my hand, faced with a choice that would determine not just the next phase of this battle, but the kind of person I would choose to be in its aftermath. What I decided to do next would change everything. Not just for me, but for everyone caught in James's web of deception. I turned the address over in my hands for several minutes, weighing my options. The smart choice would be to call Rachel immediately. Or better yet, the police. James was potentially cornered and desperate, making him more dangerous than ever. Yet, something held me back. After everything that had happened, I needed closure. Not just legal victory, but answers I could only get from James himself. I called Rachel and told her about Vanessa's visit, but not about my plans. "I'll notify the investigators," she said. "Don't do anything on your own, Lydia. We're too close to resolution to take unnecessary risks." "Of course," I replied, already knowing I wouldn't follow her advice. I took precautions, however. I texted Sophia my location and James's address with instructions to call the police if she didn't hear from me within 2 hours. I activated the recording app on my phone and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Then I called a rideshare to take me to the address Vanessa had provided, a small rental cottage in the hills north of the city. The morning was misty, the cottage partially obscured by overgrown trees. It looked peaceful, incongruous with the turmoil its current occupant had created. I took a deep breath and knocked. Long seconds passed before the door opened, revealing James in jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, a stark contrast to his usual polished appearance. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. "Lydia, I didn't expect a personal visit." He sounded tired but guarded. "Are your lawyer friends waiting nearby?" "I'm alone," I said. "We need to talk, James." He hesitated, then stepped back to let me in. The cottage interior was Spartan, a laptop on a small table, a few boxes stacked in the corner, a half-empty bottle of scotch on the counter. It didn't look like the home of someone planning to stay. "Vanessa found you," he guessed, gesturing for me to sit while remaining standing himself. I should have known she'd crack under pressure. "Why did you do it?" I asked directly. "Not just to me, but to all of us. What could possibly be worth destroying so many lives and businesses?" He paced slowly, measuring his words. "You wouldn't understand. You've had everything handed to you. Loving parents, excellent education, investors who took you seriously from day one." "That's not true," I countered. "I worked for everything I have." "Did you?" His voice hardened. "My parents died when I was 19. No inheritance, no connections, no safety net. I put myself through college washing dishes and sleeping in my car. When I tried to launch my first startup, no one would even take a meeting with me. But they met with you, didn't they? They met with Melanie and Sanjay and Lucas. So this was about jealousy?" Punishment because you thought we had it easier? It was about leveling the playing field, he replied, his tone disturbingly reasonable, taking opportunities from those who didn't deserve them and creating them for myself. By lying, manipulating, and destroying other people's work, I said. How is that leveling anything? James sat down across from me, suddenly looking weary. Did you ever wonder why I chose you, Lydia? The question caught me off guard. What? Of all the promising startups I could have targeted, why yours? His eyes held mine. Because you were brilliant, more brilliant than the others. Your technology could actually make a difference. A shadow crossed his face. I almost changed my mind, you know. After the first year of our marriage, I considered actually building TerraSync with you, legitimately. Then why didn't you? My voice nearly broke with the weight of what could have been. Because you started to outshine me, he admitted quietly. Investors would ask my opinion, then turn to hear yours instead. Partners would call asking for you directly. You were becoming the face of TerraSync, not us together. And I realized I would always be standing in your shadow. The raw honesty of his admission stunned me. For a moment, I glimpsed the deep insecurity beneath his calculating exterior. It explained his behavior, but didn't excuse it. James, that's not how partnerships work, or marriages. Success isn't zero-sum. Easy to say when you're the one succeeding, he replied bitterly. I studied him. This man I'd loved, and now barely recognized. What's on the drives Vanessa mentioned? The insurance? His expression shuddered. Information, leverage, things that could make life difficult for you and the others if necessary. It's over, James. The injunction failed. There's a criminal investigation into the falsified evidence. Whatever leverage you think you have, it won't be enough. He leaned forward, intensity returning to his eyes. You haven't won yet, Lydia. One call from me, and certain documents reach your father's university administration. One email, and Lucas's biggest client receives evidence that their data has been compromised. I've prepared for contingencies. At what cost? I asked quietly. Where does it end? You destroy us, move somewhere new, find new targets, and then what? Does it ever fill whatever void you're trying to fill? Something flickered across his face. Doubt, perhaps, or simply fatigue. You don't understand what it's like to have nothing, to be nothing. You're right, I don't. But this path you've chosen, it's made you exactly what you feared. Nothing. No real accomplishments, no real relationships, not even your real name. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift, sunlight filtering through the trees. Finally, James spoke, his voice softer. What do you want, Lydia? Why are you really here? I want it to end, I said simply. Not just for me, but for everyone. I want the external drives and whatever other insurance you've collected. I want your word that you'll stop this vendetta against all of us. And in return? He asked, pragmatic even now. I had anticipated this question. In return, while we'll continue with the legal proceedings already in motion, I won't pursue additional claims against you, and I'll recommend the others do the same. That's not much of an offer, he noted. The criminal investigation will continue regardless. It's the best you'll get, I replied firmly, and it's better than you deserve. James stood and walked to the window, staring out at the brightening day. For a moment, he looked almost peaceful, a man contemplating a difficult but necessary decision. I loved you, you know, he said without turning. Maybe not at first, but eventually. In my way. Your way wasn't love, James. It was possession. He nodded slightly as if accepting this truth. Then he walked to one of the boxes, removed a small case and handed it to me. 3 external drives. Everything I've compiled on everyone. The only copies. I took the case, surprised by his capitulation. Why give up now? He smiled faintly. Maybe I'm tired, or maybe I recognize a battle I can't win. He paused. You've outplayed me, Lydia. All of you together. It's a formidable alliance. I stood to leave, the case clutched in my hands. At the door, I turned back one last time. Was any of it real, James? Any moment of our marriage? His expression softened momentarily. The night you solved the calibration problem for the sensors. When you fell asleep at your desk and I carried you to bed. That was real. He looked away. Too few moments were. Those words followed me as I left the cottage. A bittersweet coda to 4 years of my life. I didn't look back. Arshia started 6 months later. I stood on a different stage, facing a different audience. The Renaissance Partners launch event filled a convention center rather than a hotel ballroom, with hundreds of attendees buzzing with anticipation. Today marks not just the launch of an integrated sustainability platform, I told the crowd, but a testament to collaboration and resilience. Beside me stood Melanie, Sanjay, and Lucas, my partners, my friends, my fellow survivors. Behind us, a massive screen displayed the Renaissance logo, 4 stylized elements coming together to form something new. The past months had transformed all of us. The alliance had surpassed our most optimistic projections, attracting major investors and clients. TerraSync's technology formed the backbone of the platform, complemented by the others' innovations. What James had tried to destroy had instead become something more powerful than any of our individual companies could have been alone. James himself had pleaded guilty to reduce charges of evidence tampering and fraudulent business practices. The terms included restitution to all affected companies and a 5-year ban from involvement in any public or private company. He'd left the country shortly after sentencing, reportedly moving to Southeast Asia. Vanessa had actually joined our team as head of international implementation, her climate adaptation work now fully funded through Renaissance. Her organization's projects in vulnerable coastal communities had become showcases for our technology. As we concluded the presentation to enthusiastic applause, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led us here. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had ultimately been the catalyst for something remarkable. Not just a successful business, but profound personal growth. At the reception afterward, Sophia approached with a champagne flute and a grin. We did it. Actually, you did it, Em. I shook my head. We all did it together. There's a reporter from Tech Innovator who wants a quote about your incredible comeback story. Should I send her over? I considered this. Tell her I'll do better than a quote. I'll give her the real story, about how innovation isn't born from individual genius, but from community and resilience. Renaissance's origin story, Sophia mused. I like it. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The city lights stretched before me, beautiful and alive with possibility. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Watching the live stream. So proud of you, Emmy. You've built something extraordinary from adversity. It hadn't been an easy road. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of regret. Nights when the betrayal felt too heavy to bear, when trust seemed like an impossibility. But I had persevered, and in doing so, discovered depths of strength I hadn't known I possessed. James had been wrong about so many things, but especially about success being zero-sum. Renaissance Partners had proven that collaboration could create something greater than the sum of its parts. My triumph hadn't come from defeating him, but from moving beyond him, from building rather than breaking. As I gazed at the city skyline, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The woman who had stood frozen on that first stage, watching her husband destroy everything she'd built, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and finally, truly free. The betrayal had shattered the life I thought I wanted, but from those fragments, I had built the life I was meant to have all along. And for that, paradoxically, I was grateful.